Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. Welcome. My name is Dr. Krista Kostroman. I have the delight and the pleasure of supporting tonight's session. And I'll start off with, because we see so many of you often in the chat, I'm grateful that most people now start off these sessions by calling out where they're from. It makes me very happy. We have Australia in the house. We have Lexington, Kentucky in the house. Wherever you are, please. Oh, we also get Ann Arbor, Michigan. I love hearing wherever people are from, and I'm grateful that there's enough of a community. People do it automatically when we start. So my name is Krista. I have Bryce, I have Felicia in the building, and today we are talking about the glories of stress. And I wonder if we can kick this off by offering, or at least I was going to offer a little bit of an anecdote. Because when we were approaching tonight's topic, right, we don't want to give you the very generic advice of go do something restful and stress is going to be put at bay. We want to keep this very along the themes of DNA Company, where we're speaking to the end of personalized medicine. So I'm going to offer a little bit from my journey here, just to kick us off. So as some of you may know, I started my training back a long time ago, and my training was actually in computer science. I had this very ostentatious goal. I wanted to do AI. I wanted to program a mind. I was very fascinated by brains and the concept of mind. So within school, I studied a lot of the Western model. How do we program a mind? But I was curious, and I started to looking towards other traditions and other conceptions of mind, which got me into yoga and meditation and a lot of practices that today are kind of considered the cure-all, the be-all, end-all when it comes to how do we manage stress, right? How many people in the audience have been told, oh, just meditate your stress away and you're going to be fine. And so I started working with a lot of different teachers from different traditions, usually either a Hindu-based tradition or a Buddhist-based tradition. And what I found really, really fascinating about this is that all of these traditions had this concept that not all people are born in the same way, right? When a child is born, there is a set constitution that they have. There's a little bit of a formed personality. There's a little bit of a formed body type, right? And I would offer, we'll see this as the night develops. That's exactly what genetics tells us as well. But how these traditions would further that is they would say to the end of if you have a certain personality or body constitution, your need for meditation is going to be different. So how this showed up for me, one of my teachers, and this would have been more along a Hindu tradition I would go to, and it was a little grasshopper. I'd come to the teacher, sit at the feet, be taught. And they gave me a certain meditation practice. And I tried this for quite a long time, several months at end. And I would keep coming back and I'd be like, I'm getting nada. Like, if anything, I hate this. I'm getting so frustrated. I'm getting nowhere. I sit on my mat and I'm stressed. And the person then, he's like, okay, well, I've gotten to know you over a few months and I've given you the wrong meditation. I gave you a meditation for someone with a different constitution, a different mind. And they flipped the meditation, they gave me something else, and right away it clicked. And so it was this idea, and it was a very interesting idea to me, and one that I hope we can offer as we jump into conversations with Bryce and Felicia, that A, we're all born different. A, we all have very different genes. So if we lend to our Chinese traditions, our Indian traditions, we have different constitutions. But with that also comes the need for very different stress techniques. Just like we talk about with personalized medicine and personalized healthcare, right? My healthcare plan is very different from Bryce's, which is very different from Felicia's. So too must be our approach to stress. So that was my happy little tale to kick us off.
Well said.
Oh, thank
I
you.
love it. No, because I think of meditation aptitude like a muscle. And we all, as you put it so eloquently, are born with a different capability, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. For essentially how I think about it is the elasticity of that muscle, our ability to snap back into
Yeah.
parasympathetic state. So it's not that we have the sympathetic stress response, it's our ability to snap back like an elastic into that state of rest and relaxation, which we all need more of. And guided meditation versus breath work versus exercise that Felicia would speak at length to varies. The aptitude varies, the intensity varies for different people, very much on a genetics susceptibility, as you also said, pretense. So as we all know, stress can be triggered by a requirement for the body or the mind to adjust or adapt or respond to these changing circumstances in our environment or pressures. And then this is what we're going to get into even more. Reaching your threshold, your individual threshold, can ultimately, or go beyond that threshold, can result in imbalance, symptoms, and eventually disease. In fact, I would argue it probably is North America's #1 silent killer when it's not managed or contained. Don't you think, Felicia?
Oh, I totally agree. Yes. And with working with many clients, I too look at backgrounds and personalities and where they come from, how they live, how they eat. All of it comes together, and everybody is so different. For one person, it may be work. For the other person, it's family. For the other person, it's living. It could be across the board, so many different things. And at that range, there's so many different options. Not one size fits all. I totally agree.
So we thought maybe we would establish the DNA company framework as it relates to perhaps our definition of stress. And we're going to go well beyond the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, and cortisol. It's all very relevant. We should talk about it. People have questions about it. Let's discuss it. But we want to speak to this a bit about from a threshold perspective and how we are each born onto this world, as Dr. Kostroman mentioned, with our unique ability, personal ability to manage that stress. As it affects each of us very differently. All of us have a unique threshold for mental, emotional, and physical stress. Some more for physical, some less for emotional, some more for mental. The idea, though, is this variability can be understood from this concept of hormesis. And that is to suggest that not all stress is bad, but we're looking kind of for the Goldilocks perspective, the Goldilocks optimal level, where exposure to optimal levels of stress can be beneficial. That's where we want to appreciate stress. So that will promote resilience and adaptation. And this threshold ultimately is really influenced by genetic susceptibilities in key genes that we test for related to executive function, stress response, physicality, that is to say, what kinds of exercise best suit our bodies physically, and how we adapt to all those things. So hormesis can kind of be thought of this like bell curve. We're all familiar with this bell curve. We're looking at standard deviations beyond this sort of center point, which is ultimately, let's think of this center point as optimal. So there's low, moderate, and optimal levels of stress. Too much, no good, can kill you. Too much exercise, too much water, too much stress can ultimately damage and kill you. Too little is not enough to excite the system reasonably, to either learn or stimulate the muscles to grow, or again, to create that sort of resilience within that elastic band. And that's what it's all about, that snap back into optimal state. So low stress, insufficient stimulation; high stress, excessive stimulation; optimal stress, moderate, controlled stress enhances performance and adaptation. This is so genetically based. You guys you must have separately and together examples of clients who've come to you and said, like, I run marathons. Maybe Felicia, that I run marathons and I can do 3 in a week, but I just can't deal with my kids screaming. Or, Dr. Kosterman, you might hear about executives, CEOs, and we have amazing programs for them at the DNA company because they don't realize they're managing stress effectively. But in fact, they're so good at managing stress that their bodies are constantly stressed from other angles, right? Physiologically, they're not getting out and exercising enough or following Felicia's, instructions enough. So maybe we should open up the conversation that way.
Yeah. Well, I wonder just before we jump into it, if I can offer a different kind of tangible definition of hormetic stress, right? Because I think it's a tricky concept sometimes for people to get their head around, that there's this perfect level of stress. And so I'll offer this really, really cool thing I learned about trees. Naturopaths, we love our trees. There's a study done, it looked at what did trees require to grow. And hormetic stress, meaning good stress, is absolutely required for them to grow. So for a tree to actually grow tall, you need enough wind to push it back and forth to encourage it to grow tall. If you do not have that wind, that good stress, the tree will literally just fall over. That said, if you have too much wind, if you have the hurricane wind, the whatever winds, that tree is going to be uprooted and down. And so when I think of hormetic stress, I think about the trees and the wind in the sense that we need enough wind to encourage our growth, right? And we'll talk about what those good stresses are. I think Bryce has a glorious, and Felicia with her exercise, have a beautiful long list of what that can mean. But then also we don't want those hurricane winds that quite literally uproot us. And I would offer, at least within society right now, we're seeing hurricane winds worth of stress, right?
Before over to Felicia, because it's so important that we actually maybe kick this off with physical stress, and exercise is just a perfect, beautiful example of hormetic stress, where too much, we might injure and damage ourselves, too little, and, we get fat and ugly, and let's be real. But this concept of the tree that you brought up and wind, it reminds me of our bones, which most people don't realize are active, constantly growing. This process of osteoblastic, osteoclastic, on, off, remineralize, demineralize, constantly going. It's a vital active organ, and it's perfect amount of stress, especially into the menopausal years and postmenopausal years, comes from what we know as the piezoelectric effect, right? Us against gravity, which also plays off in exercise. And we look at some of these genes that in our profiles are poor vitamin D metabolizers, poor remineralizers, poor detoxifiers, all which play off on bones. If you, for example, send a person into outer space within a month, doesn't matter what their initial bone mineral density is, they're osteoporotic, not just osteopenic, osteoporotic. That's because the stress against gravity here on Earth is the perfect amount of stress to keep the bones constantly activated. Too much, you're going to break it. You're going to break your bones. Too little, and you become osteoporotic. And so that's another beautiful, and it reminded me when you said, trees and waving around in this perfect amount of stress. And Felicia, define this even further for us when it comes to our physical bodies, because so many of us are overdoing it. So many of us are underdoing it. What's the hormetic Goldilocks formula when it comes to exercise?
It's funny. That is a great analogy. I love that, the trees and all that stuff, but we are just the same. Yeah, good stress is good because it's going to push you to another limit to get better. But at the same time, you have to know your body, because too much, then you break down, you get sick, and you overtrain, and then you get burnout. And then that's a whole nother cycle. And we don't want burnout. So to meet the golden hour, the golden time, is to have enough stress that it pushes you to be better and to do better and lift more, and maybe broaden your horizon on what that looks like in physical fitness. It could be, say you lift weights, but then maybe say, okay, I'm going to push myself and do some cardio with it, like some extra cardio. It all looks different. But yeah, on the same path, if it's too much, then it's not a good thing. And then we go into you maybe end up getting injured or sleepless. I mean, or you don't feel like eating. It's a whole nother thing once you get into stressful burnout. So yeah, there's a fine line, and you have to be really conscious of your body, and then being really in tune with, how do you feel? How do you sleep? How are you eating? How does it look in the mirror? Is it growing? Am I being the best I can when I show up? Or am I lacking? And that's where you talked about, well, maybe your family might say, hey, I see something, or you might have a partner there that be like, you okay? Checking in with you if you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. So I wonder maybe before we jump into too many of the solutions, we could also, take a bit of a step back and define like different genes that will curate different abilities to manage stress, right? Because if our older traditions tell us people are born in different ways, some people are great with stress, some people not so much, and no one can handle hurricanes. Why don't we talk about different genes that will, if you have certain configurations of this gene, you're going to be a little bit more stress happy compared to other people who sincerely need to be a little bit more reverent and aware of stress and really offering more to filling their cup, etc. Bryce, Bryce, you articulate this so very well when it comes to what genes influence people's capacity to receive and accept stress. Where do you want to start with that?
Sure. And so we refer to that as executive function, the aptitude or ability of our born unto this world genetics, for which we are able to manage acute stressors, particularly, and how that ultimately plays off onto the ability to manage constant and chronic stressors. So there are archetypes, individuals who are just sort of more predisposed to managing stress and acute stress, mental, emotional, and or physical, and those that are just less able. But there is no such thing as the perfect genetic code. There is simply that which identifies an individual, often speaks volumes to their personality, again, their threshold, their ability to manage that perfect hormetic zone. But they may, be less able to, listen to the ticking clock on a wall, or a crying baby just aggravates them. So, I mean, we can actually see this in the genetic code, and it's incredibly informing as to then how to approach one's life. It informs from a perspective of, remember to eat at certain times, remember how much exercise to get, remember what supplements to take that offset some of these genetic susceptibilities. So when we discuss executive function, we're really talking about kind of a handful of genes. It's never about a single gene. These genes, if we're to ramble them off in their acronyms, it would be ADRA2B, which is in charge of adrenaline, essentially, and how we metabolize adrenaline in the brain and nervous system. Catecholomethyltransferase, or COMT, which is essentially, making this oversimplified, the speed at which we uncouple catecholamines, including adrenaline and dopamine. DRD2 is a big one. So dopamine receptor D2, and that is sort of how many receptors for dopamine do we have scattered throughout our brain and nervous system. Monoamine oxidase, the gene that controls the enzyme for which metabolizes, certain neurotransmitters, including serotonin. Then we look at serotonin, both from how much do we make, TPH2 gene, how much do we actually recycle? Our bodies are great at recycling these neurotransmitters, 5-HT-TLPR. And then, of course, BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which has a lot to do, more than just neuroplasticity, which plays a huge role in how we actually cope and manage with stress and how we remember, but equally as much how we forget, how we create new nerve connections, and how we disassociate them in both neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, but also mood and behavior. So we kind of look at all those and more to determine one's susceptibility to stress. So let's even bring this from another angle, putting all these together in that sort of hormetic bell curve. It's also, likened to boiling point of water. We all have one. So if water at room temperature at sea level rather boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Well, some of us in the face of stress, we might boil at 90 degrees, maybe even 80 degrees. Others, we boil, it takes 120 degrees before that water bubbles over and causes sort of symptoms, if you will. That was the CEO or executive I was telling you about earlier. We all know too well from our programs at the DNA company. It's not that it's so good that you can manage so much more stress. Mentally, emotionally, fine, but this is impacting physiologically, biochemically on your heart and your endothelial lining and your detox processes, your sleep, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to weigh and have a toll later on in life. But so full circle, we can put some of these together. The classic anxiety picture, the high stress responder, if you will, is the individual who's got slow COMT. Okay, so they're an AA. We look at them as an AA variant. They're a worrier. Spinning, hamster wheel, always going, decreased 5-HT-TLPR. So there's sort of poor recycling, maybe even poor manufacturing serotonin, the feel-good hormone neurotransmitter. So they're an SS variant on the 5-HT-TLPR. And maybe they're a fast Mayo, monoamine oxidase. So they're what we refer to perhaps as a tempest, right? This individual is super high stress. They're a deer in headlights every time stress is upon them. Their threshold, their hormetic threat, we got to move that over to that 80 degrees boiling point and treat them for that optimal stress response at 80, right? Not 100, not 120, like a CEO executive, 80, and then go from there. We know their baseline. We know what their hormetic variance is. And so this individual, they may have to do a lot more forest walks, right? Where we know that sort of deep immersion in forest is exposure to negative ions. They get serotonin exposure. Maybe we have to like supplement them with 5-HTP to boost their serotonin production. These kinds of things to address that particular instance, that particular predisposition.
I would offer clinically through my own practice, through programs within the DNA company, one of the most powerful things that we can do even before getting to the treatment plan. So just in this concept that Bryce is talking about, being honest about what your genes are and where they put you on that boiling point scale, really is being honest that I am someone at 80 degrees, right? My body is not composed of someone who gets to be 120. I'm
Right.
80 degrees, and I'm going to plan my stress relief accordingly. You know, you can pretend all you want that you're 120 degrees. It's just not going to happen, right? So you need to plan the stress relief accordingly, such that you almost feel as if you're an 120 person for no other reason than you've embedded within your daily practices, your stress routines, whatever that might be, the space that never has you feeling as if you've exceeded that 120 or whatever that might be. And so I know some people don't hear that. Like, I think genes is one of the most powerful ways, or if you borrow from traditional medicine and you align your constitution to those, these tend to be some of the most powerful ways to be honest about where you're starting at. So the techniques that Bryce is talking about, be it forest walks or the I bow to your physical power, or like the exercise that can come from Felicia, right, in some of her programs and some of her work, right, that can be catered truly to where you are, your constitution, your genes, as opposed to pretending you're something else and working against yourself.
Right. I would argue that in some instances, it's a non-negotiable to start your day with exercise in certain predispositions of individuals with certain genetic aptitudes for low stress threshold. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure, literally on an everyday basis. Would you agree, Felicia? I mean, is there those instances where I'm one of them. I just can't.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. I think that you have to set a plan. You have to know what you're going to do and put that plan into motion. You know, I want to go back on what you say on the DNA test, that I think what I love about this test is that some people or some clients that I get are like, they feel so stressed out of the box and they don't know where it's coming from and they don't know what to do. And they think they're here and they're really not. They may be here, but when the test comes back and it tells you, I think it's for the client, they are like, oh, okay, I get it. I know what it is and how do I manage it better, instead of kind of being this, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm totally out of control, and bringing it back to like, oh, okay, it is manageable. I'm not the only person. And do you know what I'm saying? I felt like it gave me, even me, because I'm high anxiety, but I was like, oh, okay, I'm not here what I thought I am. I'm really here. And it's manageable. And I know how to do it. And I know on the scale where I need to be on how to make it work for me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We want to make sure.
Some uncommon and interesting facts, by the way, about stress that not many folks realize. Number one, stress can actually sharpen your memory. And a lot of folks, listening in tonight know that there's hippocampal deficiencies. If you've carried around this ApoE34 or 44 variant, not only is this sort of related to Alzheimer's predisposition, but also, of course, memory. Stress can also have a unique scent. Humans detect stress through smell, pheromones. And so that sweat produced when stress is, high, it's a different chemical composition. And subconsciously, we recognize this in other people. And that's one reason why it can be contagious, by the way. Observing somebody else, smelling somebody else, can be a trigger to stress in your own body. And it also impacts incredibly negatively in most cases, whether it's that you're running as a marathon runner from a physical perspective, or you're just mentally, emotionally stressed out, not sleeping enough, your gut microbiome. Chronic stress affects the gut microbiome probably as much or more than nutrition. People don't realize this, or let's call it poor nutrition, leading to this whole, and we test for that. So especially those individuals who are predisposed to mental, emotional stress that show this executive function, which, by the way, speaking of serotonin, so much of it is produced in the gut, right? So much of the central nervous system relies on gut serotonergic production for homeostatic or balance. And so when the microbiome's out to lunch because stress is high, it's a two-way street. That's the vagus nerve we all hear about. You got to check your microbiome. With the Gut 360 that we offer, looks at that. So we know we have these high stress responders. We're almost always suggesting with incredible credibility behind it as to why, that they check their gut 360, their microbiome, to know what they can do in their gut, which will directly affect positively their stress threshold. So by doing these things, you can, and this is the point, knowing where you are, your baseline, your hormetic threshold, sort of middle point, you can become, from an 80 boiling point individual, you can become that 90, 95. You can grow your threshold, right? You can become more elastic, is what we're getting at, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important to consider, in the sense of the way you live your life, as well as what has happened, will shift that, right? So we know, for example, childhood trauma is going to shift that, independent of whatever your genes might be. And so I would offer, I think, as much as I want to say, and as much as I would love to pretend genes are the be all end all, there's such a huge clinical picture that goes into it. So for those that are in our audience tonight, knowing your genes is really important, but coupling that, especially if stress is a sincere concern and something you're really struggling to getting on top of, coupling that with sincere clinical care and working with someone, within this team, within the DNA company, can be very helpful, because we have that capacity not only to know exactly what your genes say, but to be very mindful of elements both within your current life and your history, medical, personal, trauma, all that fun stuff, that will shift where that needle sits. And for those that really struggle, they see our program offerings and they're like, oh, maybe not so much for me. We can talk about it later, but we do have a budding offering. It's just kind of in the trial phases right now, but it's a program called DNA Precision. It's just for people who are attending webinars and kind of hear about it through word of mouth, but it's something that we really try to create personalized medicine around it. And so if you're someone struggling with stress, that might be something you want to consider later on. We'll talk about it later on, but I think Bryce brings up a really, really good point, that genes is a huge part of it, because that really sets where that threshold is going to be. But there are elements that can shift it a few degrees either which way. And we want to talk about the positive things that are going to increase where your stress, that tree point, that hermetic point can be.
Well, and you mentioned trauma. I mean, we all have trauma in our lives, some much more than others. And both to acknowledge that, to identify with it, and acknowledge it and move through it. There are some individuals that simply will have an easier time. I don't like the term coping, right? It doesn't make sense. It's not a healthy vernacular. I really appreciate more managing that stress. So how do you learn? And this is what we're talking about, methods in which to manage that better. I don't mean package it up, put it away and never think about it, but there are definitely individuals, archetypes within what we look at within the DNA 360 that incredibly well define the emotional empath, right? So the empathetic individual. This is often a decreased ADRA2B function. So the adrenaline is not managed effectively. They're what we call a DD, or doubly deleted. Those are empathetic individuals. They often also have a low BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So we refer to them affectionately as the learner. There's no such thing as unable to learn. The GG variants of BDNF are they just pick up things better. But the emotional empath is a little bit less apt that way. I'm one of them. Hey, look, I mean, we all manage in different ways. And then there's, combine that with a reduced TPH2, and that's the tryptophan hydroxylase, the amount of serotonin you're producing, tendencies toward, not guaranteed, but just tendencies toward more melancholic. You put all that together, just more predisposed to PTSD and just remembering and reliving a trauma. And by the way, I just have to say this, like, not all, I have to throw this in. We've heard of eustress, right? I mean, eustress as in EU stress. Eustress is the opposite. It's too much of a good thing. It's just too stimulation and exposure. That's very toxic to some people. So, we get to sort of refer to these within, our own exchange of case analysis and different individuals as this intrepid risk taker. This individual from the COMP gene, that's the speed at which they uncouple in their nervous system catecholamines like noradrenaline and dopamine, they're a GG. So as opposed to earlier, we're talking about the AA, they're a GG. They're a warrior. They're not a warrior. They worry about many things. They're a warrior. And then they've got a low DRD2. they're a thrill seeker. So there's not enough of those dopamine receptor sites to engage. So first they're, anytime dopamine, which is the feel good sort of, hormone responsible for, excitement and this aptitude for thrill, not in a lot of receptors, and they're quickly uncoupled when they land, if you will. And then they're a fast MAO. Monoamine oxidase. So they also just really quickly metabolize serotonin and some other catecholamines. So you put that together, this is, these guys will jump out of planes without parachutes. Okay. But that's not good. It's them. And we have to learn, they have to learn how to dampen and bring that sort of 120-degree boiling point down, right? They might be over exercising. You might see these individuals in your practice, Felicia, as over exercise just because they're addicted to the dopamine rush, the next hit. And you got to say, stop, let your joints and your muscles heal, right?
Yeah. This 100% is the person I see in my practice where I'm like, hey, so how do you know you're stressed? And they're like, I don't understand. I'm never stressed. And I'm like, okay, well, cool. How does your family tell you you're stressed? And they're like, oh yeah, maybe I yell too much or something else, right? I'm sure, Felicia, you probably see it in the sense of the person's like, when should I stop working out? And you're like, well, you're on crutches, so now might be a good idea.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, well, my hamstrings are like, it's tight as I'm like, okay, well, maybe we ought to take the day off. Maybe we I've also had those clients that I'm like, okay, you need to get some cardio. And they're like, I'm getting 35,000 steps in. I'm like, a day? What? Okay. But they're all in, and I'm like, okay, maybe I ought to back off a little bit. But yeah, it's like the parachute jumper, like, well, I'm going for it. I'm just gonna go for it,
Yeah.
And so, and we should say, not only from an executive perspective, the mood behavior aspect of things, which translates into how one should perhaps identify the most optimal workout routine, but we also look at other very physiological gene presentations. So that is to say, how does the cardiovascular system respond to physical stress? Should we be guiding somebody more toward a HIIT, high intensity interval training, or should we be guiding them more to, a yoga Pilates or, a mixed bag? Are they okay or qualified to run marathons, or should they really hold back and rethink their physical activity? So we can actually get prescriptive on a lot of these things, right? I mean, what have there been examples where, Felicia, you've seen somebody for, they might be even young and they've been doing this for years, but we're just like, whoa, given your genetic susceptibilities, I want to help shift you entirely from what you're doing to something 180. Have you had experiences like that?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll take a perfect example. I had a client that was doing cardio. I mean, bless her heart. She just thought she had to run for miles and miles a day. I mean, and with no results, just running and running. And then they get the test done. Well, lo and behold, they do better with weightlifting. Weighted exercises do better for them. Doesn't mean they need to stop doing cardio, but we don't need to do hours of it. But society, and you read and it all says, oh, but you have to do X to get, Y. You've got it, and that's not the case. So changed it a little bit, said, let's back off the cardio a lot, but we're still going to do it, but not too extreme that you're going to do. Let's add some weights. And do you know what? It was like magic. Her body just morphed, and it realized it was lacking the good stuff, right? For her, it was lacking the resistant training.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing, which is so like also relieving. The person was so frustrated. So I think that's the hardest part, is people get so frustrated because they don't know where to turn. They don't know where to do.
Yeah.
They get stressed out again, it leads to other things. And it was just it's a blueprint of what you need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to also say, something that will interest a lot of folks. We got some great questions flowing in already, and please continue to ask them. Bring this
Feel free to raise your hand too. We
Yeah,
can
let's
take
bring this to
questions here.
conversation. We're here to answer questions and involve everyone on the thread, everyone listening in tonight. We
Yeah.
all experience stress. We're all human. Love to hear some anecdotes, how
I
you all deal with
wonder,
stress. How you feel it? Do you feel it in your brain? Do you feel it in your heart? Do you feel it in your
why don't
muscles? Do
we
you feel it
pull
in your
up the
gut?
poll results? Because we did ask the audience to the end of, and I think Bryce is getting us to that point right now where we want to start talking about, regardless what your constitution is, let's talk about different ways to support stress. So let's see the poll results. Let's see where people are at in regards to how stressed they are. And then separately, what are they doing about it? So our scale, most people are sitting pretty high stress. I'm seeing majority of our audience tonight here sitting at a 3 or above, with a significant portion of our audience at 5. So a lot of people just baking in their own stress right now. So welcome, and we're glad you're here to be supported by us.
I
So
love to see that, just sort of on track with our conversation here and with Felicia as the expert, how they're coping with their stress.
yeah.
68% are reporting through exercise. So good for you, as opposed to, some of the more illicit drugs, alcohol, television, video games. Also, taking a break and family and friends is scoring really high at 70% and 50%, respectively. So these are all healthy ways in which to, move to that parasympathetic state. So once again, sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. Average rule of thumb is for every hour in the day, we should be spending 5 to 10 minutes equivalent helping our brain and our body move to a parasympathetic state. And that can be done. We'll get into some of the solutions: breath work, exercise, meditation, etc.
Or even just because I'm really excited about this idea. I think Bryce planted a seed where he said, stress can be contagious, right? You're around someone who's stressed, you're going to pick up some of their pheromones. In a very similar way, a parasympathetic state, a rested state, can also be very contagious. So for those people that say, like, I go to family and friends, that engagement will quite literally shift your physiology, assuming the person isn't stressed, right? There's some checks and balances there. But I want to make sure that we don't see people as necessarily this thing that will create more stress, but also can be the solution for it, can quite literally shift our nervous system. I think that's an important
Absolutely.
balance there.
If it's not already on your mind, by the way, we
Let's hear
should
it.
also just really quickly describe how stress, when it's not under control, when it's not managed effectively, and you're not doing what your body would ultimately love for you to be doing based on your genetic susceptibilities and aptitude, it is aging you faster. Chronologically, this is something we also have our finger on the pulse for. We have a wonderful test called DNA aging, and it looks at methylation and how quickly you're aging biologically versus the calendar years. And it's so important to understand that prolonged stress can lead to excessive methylation, which then translates to fewer healthy years on this planet, potentially even predisposed to early aging and death. So stress is probably, as I alluded to in the beginning, number one North American wide silent killer, contributing to diabetes, cancer, just a terrible end of life scenario. So we also want to pull in examples of what folks are doing, because we want to help them understand they're actually on the right track, or maybe we have them shift over to something more effectively. So what can we talk to in terms of individuals who are perhaps maybe dipping into alcohol a little bit too much, or addicted to the 4 screens? Dr. Kostroman, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, just simply identifying that is what you use when you are stressed, right? I'm always amazed sometimes that people aren't necessarily aware that they're stressed. They're just aware I'm doing these certain activities a little bit more. I think the most common I see this is like when people get stressed, they'll try to bury themselves in TV, a little bit of an avoidant activity, right? I'm just going to sit and watch a screen because then my body isn't really thinking, and I'm just kind of, that will down-regulate me a little bit, or at least keep my mind busy. So my first thought to that is simply just identifying when you start to get in that stress state, when you're reaching for these things, that being the first trigger, the first alert of like, oh, I'd better shift and do something different because my body is starting to approach that stress state. Does that make sense when I say that? Because I think not everyone recognizes that they're reaching for alcohol. Not everyone recognizes that they're reaching for, excessive food or, whatever other vices it might be it gambling or, other drugs and alcohol, etc. I think firstly, simply becoming aware that you're reaching for that is the first step, because you want to nip that in the butt. You want to nip the stress while it's still in a smaller state versus when stress is almost propagating and encouraging itself, right?
How about journaling? I highly recommend journaling, again, to put that in front of your face. So not necessarily to look at it at the end of every single day, but this translates, so glaringly obvious when it comes to, dietary interventions. If I were to ask a patient what they ate last week, no one remembers. For that matter, yesterday. So when you
Or this
typically
morning.
right. In the literature, when you ask folks about how much they are drinking or, experiencing their preferred vice, gambling, sex, drugs, alcohol, what you name it, there's a profile for that in the DNA 360. We know you, we see you, and we hear you, and we can help you. But the idea, though, is journaling it really puts it into your consciousness in front of your face. So a 7-day journal and then look at it afterward. Those are true numbers. Those are true figures. And then to your point, understanding those triggers. So don't just list when you do something. Don't just list the food. Don't just list that extra glass or two of wine. You want to assign that to an emotion. And don't be, very vague about it, stressed. I just wanted to unwind. What was the trigger emotion that caused you to do that thing in that time? And again, be honest and be very detailed, and then revisit it at the end of that particular week. That, without too much instruction, people are resourceful, and they understand quite quickly that, oh, I might want to address those triggers. I might want to address or talk to somebody or engage with a clinician with a DNA company to understand what a switch out might be. It's not the same switch out for everyone. That comes full circle to our point. It's not meditation or crossing your fingers and your legs like a Buddhist monk for everybody. It is engaging in that which is the most ideal switch out that your genes dictate will work for you. And we have those secrets. We understand what those things are. One way to, quite literally, by the way, have a finger on the proverbial pulse for stress and whether something is working for you or not working for you. Let's just quickly talk about heart rate variability for a second, because there's more signals sent from your heart to your brain than from your brain to your heart. That's during exercise, stressful emotions, day-to-day activities, you in your zone. It doesn't matter. But the higher your heart rate variability is, and this is, by the way, a differential of how the heart beats beat to beat. It's not the 60 beats per minute or whatever average pulse rate you have. It is the actual lub-dub behavior, so cardiac output, input of blood, that defines whether or not you're in sympathetic, stressed, or parasympathetic, rest and digest state. And your heart can't beat in a particular way if it's in a parasympathetic or restful state. It beats erratically, and it beats more variably, believe it or not, counterintuitively, when it's in a restful state. So free apps online that have you simply put your thumb on the back of your phone and can actually judge what your heart rate variability is doing at any minute. That might actually help an individual understand those journaled triggers I was alluding to earlier, when they happen, how they happen, and then moving through them and switching them out, seeing the difference by studying on a regular basis your heart rate variability. For a quick example, doing a meditation, 10 minutes of breath work, by examining your heart rate variability and seeing you get better and better, more and more improved, is incredibly sustainable, or let's call it empowering, so that you're sustaining the meditative exercise or the meditation routine. And it can be just that easy.
And I'd really offer for everyone in the audience who maybe has dabbled in meditation and felt it more stressful than not, the tools that Bryce just offered there can be very, very helpful, because it kind of takes you a little bit out of your body, which for a lot of people who are undergoing stress or have experienced trauma or don't feel comfortable in their body for whatever reason, having something a little more external to work with. So that heart rate variability, be it an app with your phone or there's devices out there, these sorts of things can be a really good way to start to get into techniques and tools and meditation techniques that are a little bit more comfortable and less stressful on the body, because there's a lot of people who sit in stress who have some trauma, some of those more delicate genomic profiles when it comes to ingraining stress in their body. These people tend to register a lot better with these techniques because they're not as intense and there's an element of separation. So something just to think about. I want to make sure as we go through things, we're talking about different tools and techniques for different constitutions, right? And if you want further support on that, like, don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we collectively as a whole love to support people as they navigate stress, because we appreciate it as the #1 killer in this glorious continent and probably the world of ours.
You know, and we would be extremely remiss if we didn't mention our Black Label program, right? So Black Label is an exclusive program that appreciates your genetic aptitude and susceptibility to stress and so many other things, that gives you a biological, biochemical edge. So we spoke about these genes that predispose us to dealing or managing or coping, if you will, with stress. We each do it differently. We can supercharge your nervous system and give you the ingredients, the very wherewithal to improve upon, not change your DNA. You can't do that. You can manage genetic expression. That's the latest, epigenetic, but giving you these specific ingredients to add to your system to ultimately offset and or empower your genetic susceptibilities. So for example, you know, if we were to find that you were more of a tempest, an individual who's just sort of quick, that's the MAO individual, is just fast to metabolize their neurochemicals, dopamine and serotonin and so forth. As fast as they're in, they're out. Might want to give you a little bit of an advantage prior to meditation by increasing theanine. Theanine's known, it's an amino acid, very safe and effective for most people, to increase focus, attention, alertness, concentration, and literally more alpha wave. That's what you're trying to accomplish. This is like a Buddhist monk achieves in meditation
right now.
right? So, and it also improves sleep. Alpha wave helps to get you to sleep better. So this will improve your sleep. So, but if we were to give an individual we knew was a fast Mayo, maybe a slow Compt, an individual who's, you know, predisposed to not being ideally suited for meditation, but a 10-minute breathing exercise supercharged on some theanine, we knew they would do well. The Black Label program is just that. Customized supplements for you at the right dose for you, given your genetic aptitude and susceptibility. You know what I'd like to do right now as well, because she's actually with us listening and able and willing. We don't always get this treat, but Tracy, our CEO, Tracy Wood, is available to talk about our Precision 360 program as well, customized invitation only program. I would love to pull her in right now so she can, you know, there's a lot of challenged CEOs out there that, again, think that they're doing very well with their level of stress. You know, you might think so, but to your point, Dr. Kostroman, and even what you're describing earlier, Felicia, you're not necessarily on as much of an A game as you could imagine being. We've got the solution for you. So Tracy, if you're still there and able, please chime in. Talk to us about the Precision 360 program.
And
yeah, hi, Dr. Wylde. I'm here. Hi, Dr. Kostroman. Hi, Felicia. You look great, girl.
Thank you.
So it's important to know that I actually do have Felicia as my trainer. So if you guys want to know, and she will kick your ass straight up. So just be ready for that. So yeah, Dr. Wylde, thank you for asking. So the Precision 360 is an invitation only program. So we're not taking just anybody into the program. And it's designed to do a couple of things. One, it's designed to really tailor our approach to a client based on where they are, where they want to go, where they see concerns, and where they'd like to see improvement. And we like to take a look at that. And we like to do a lot of actual testing. So we do blood, we do saliva, we do blood spot, we do full-blown venipuncture in your home, right? So this is a program that's really for that person that wants to put a good 12 months into themselves, right? That doesn't see themselves as an expense, but rather as an investment, that wants to get to where they want to be before longevity becomes something they feel like they can't obtain, right? So that's kind of how we built it and why. We get a lot of people in their 40s and 50s realizing that, they're 20 years away from retirement. Are they financially ready, right? We all do that financial checkup, right? In our late 30s and our early 40s. Well, now they're starting to do that longevity checkup as well, where people are saying, my mom, for example, she needs full help ambulating. She can't ambulate on her own. She's only going to be 84 this year. That is too young. When you look at other people in our community and in our society that are in their 70s and in their 80s, and they're out golfing, they're out running, they're living their best life. They're not just laying there waiting to die. So these programs are again, invitation only. If you want to look at a program or to be considered for a program, there's a panel that we have that sits with the candidate and goes through a lot of things. We ask a lot of questions. One of the first things that I hear is, do I have to do the testing? The answer is yes. If you haven't done the testing, don't bother applying. Another question I get is, do I have to share my medical history? Yes, you do. If you don't want to do that, that's okay. We still love you, but don't apply. We want this to be something that's unlike anything you've ever tried before. And I believe that this will be the program that gets people over that last thing that they want to change, or that obstacle that they've been running up against and banging their head against the wall for so long. I believe this program is that. There's a ton of mental health support. There is a ton of connected tissue between you and your practitioner. Like I said, Felicia is my fitness coach. I have a connected engagement with Felicia as a patient through the system several times a week, and it helps keep me on track, and she helps hold that accountability. So there's a ton of accountability, there's a ton of testing. It is going to take a year to go through the program. So if you're not interested in giving you a year of your life, that's okay. We're not mad at you. Just don't apply.
Thanks, Chief. That's it is an incredible program. You're a trailblazer for bringing this to market. Anyone listening to that would be lucky to onboard with us. And I don't say that lightly. I've been in clinical practice for 25 years, and I think that I've got a pretty comprehensive program in place. It frankly doesn't touch this program. I encourage anyone. And, you said something that struck me. I'm going to reiterate it. It's the one thing I want people to, if there's nothing else you leave with tonight, you want to remember this one thing that our CEO just said: your health is an investment, never an expense. It's the best investment you can make. And we all agree on that. Should we get to questions? We've got a bunch of really good questions here that we should maybe table.
Should
we get there?
Let us. And I guess first and foremost, is there anyone with their hand up? The voice of God, can you let us know if there's anyone with their hand up?
And while you're doing that, I've got Marissa who's asking an amazing question. Are there any ways to help reverse the shortening of telomeres if they may have occurred because of life stressors? Yeah, so this is a question I'm reading, but realize I only addressed a couple of minutes ago. Yes, we test for it even better. We include telomeres, which are little caps on the end of your chromosomes, which shorten excessively and quickly. Telomerase is just activated, the enzyme that breaks this down. It's like the tip of a shoestring. If that's broken and frayed, it gets harder to weave that shoestring through, and eventually, your shoes are kind of garbage. That's like the caps at the end of our chromosomes. So they will fray, shorten, and destruct quicker under stress. So we look at those under our de-aging test profile, but more importantly is the methylation I was telling you about. So this is something that we also look at under the DNA. So what's your aptitude for poor or optimal methylation, for which we can intervene. And methylation, by the way, kind of a stressor. I mean, you think of it that way, that induces inflammation in the body. And that's the medical buzz term of the day for a good reason. It's what causes all disease. So methylation is something that we want to get control of. There's a genetic susceptibility to it. We can actually see it live time. Where is your methylation now? What's the length of your telomere? And then how do we intervene? And then 3, 6, 9, 12 months later, we repeat the DNA aging, and we've literally through the program that Tracy just described, our CEO, and others, put years, but not just years, healthy years on your life. This has changed the day you die. And I don't say that loosely. So thank you for that question. Heidi's asking, can you talk about your gut microbiome test? Is it different than others out there? Perfect question for you, Dr. Kostroman, because you're the test guru when it comes to our gut microbiome. We tend to focus, don't we? I mean, there's so many gut microbiome tests out there. We tend to focus on what's important as it plays back to our genetics, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And just to quickly kind of go back to Marissa's question as well in regards to telomeres, the DNA testing, should you so choose to do with us, it actually doesn't focus on telomeres. And I'm going to offer the why behind that, because I think Bryce caught it mostly, but I want to make sure it's very crystal clear. When we, the scientific we, tried to first assess aging, telomeres was our first go at it. And it's pretty good. It gives us a rough estimate. But since then, and telomeres, I think, Bryce will be honest, was probably the 80s when we started first playing with those. Since then, though, science has progressed really far, and we know that telomeres aren't the best way to capture aging, nor, to the point, look at how do we reverse aging in the sense of show less stress on the body, and the body's a bit happier with the way things are working. So it's more those methylation patterns that we're looking at. So should you get our testing, I want you to kind of be ready. It's not going to focus on telomeres, because while they're kind of cool to look at, the nerds out there get really excited about them. They're not the best measure of aging. It's more the methylation that Bryce spoke to. Now on to the next one, next nerd jump. All right, so let's talk about microbiome and our gut testing, right? So I think the one thing that really differentiates our testing from other ones on the market, right, is that it tends to look more at ratios and relationships of different families of bacteria within the gut than necessarily individual family members. Okay, so what do I mean by that? A lot of times, when we do scientific study, we'll peer into the gut, and there are gajillions of things living in your gut, innumerable, according to current science, right? We can't capture them all. So what happens is science will often go in and look at one particular strain of one particular thing, and they'll try and correlate that with a big health picture, right? And everything that we talked about tonight says that it's not one thing that causes everything else. It's a combination of different things. So what our test tries to do instead is actually look at different bacterial families, different fungal families, all that fun stuff lives inside of you. Sounds gross, but it's true. All of the families that are living within your gut. And it's really looking at the balance between those families, because where the stronger research is coming out is not necessarily around individual strains for overall health, right? If you caught something and you're acutely sick, that individual strain matters. But in the day-to-day and kind of the wellness and how your immune system is working, how your metabolism is impacted, how your mental health is impacted, that really more looks at the families of these different bacteria and where are they in relationship to one another. So there's certain families that you want to be larger, happy, and healthy, and other families that you arguably want non-existent. So we'll look at those different families instead of the individual strains. Do we still look at strains? Absolutely. Yes, they're important and cool, but it's more those overall populations that will curate, because again, we can't study literally everything inside the gut. We want to look at those different families, and that right now is capturable and very powerful when it comes to how do we adjust a clinical plan. If we see that you have one family that's overpopulated, what do we do about that? That's kind of the power of where we're going with the Gut 360 testing, this more holistic view, as opposed to reducing down to one or two bad actors.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the story is all about microbiome diversity. We're trying to get, an established diversity down there, and there's no such thing as the best probiotic. A lot of companies might try to convince you there is. What there is are probiotics, specifically strains and species, to Dr. Kostroman's point, that confer health benefit. If we identify within that diversity and or phylobalance, the families and strains that should be there are disproportionate or imbalanced, and we can identify, of course, certain genes, detox pathways, hormone imbalances that predispose you to that, we're there to fix the whole picture. Not get into the weeds about what one strain is or is not growing, because it really doesn't, play a role on the grander scheme of things, unless you've pathology in your gut, in which case maybe a different gut score test is for you. We have a question from Richard, who's asking, a lot of content on social media about how to lower cortisol levels with mocktails, different herbs, foods. Are there foods or drinks that can actually lower cortisol? Felicia, this is you. You can speak to, like, there's just so much garbage out there. At the end of the day, I'm hoping what you're going to do is maybe convince us all that it's got to start from diet, good macro, the established macronutrients, and then exercise. Can we start there?
Yeah, it's exactly right. Yeah, cortisol is a huge stressor in the gym world, in that, it's like cortisol, you got to keep cortisol. Well, cortisol is all done through food and through exercise, with a combination of what you eat. And you're exactly right. Good food in, good stuff back out. And you've got to keep stress low. Cortisol, no, there is not like a pill to take and it's going to, your cortisol is just going to be gone. No, it's a drip. It's what keeps us in fight or flight, right? I mean, it's an actual thing in our body. So we can't stop it, nor do we want to, really. But to manage it, yes, through exercise, diet, sleep, and just taking care of ourselves.
Right. And the right amount. Again, let's go back to the hormetic argument, the Goldilocks perfect amount of exercise, which we can define for the individual based on their DNA, is going to not only help to burn or metabolize cortisol, but prevent that cortisol from having negative effects on our musculoskeletal system, right? Because, I mean, it is immune depressing, tissue degenerating. Too much is not good, but too little cortisol is also not good, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
That's
right.
Yeah. I would offer, and I think I'm always very mindful anytime you see something on social media, you have to be mindful of who is offering that, are they qualified to offer that information? And then separately, does it actually apply to you, right? So oftentimes they're kind of saying, like, just buy this thing, take this stress relief forever, and you're going to be fine. And that shouldn't be the case. But I would offer there's going to be instances where there are herbs and other adaptogenic sort of things that can be really helpful and supportive in stressful moments, right? So for example, I think of, when people go in, students are an easy example. Students go through this period of exams once or twice a year, and they're always super stressed. And I'm like, well, if you're going to be walking in, you're going to be stressed. Why don't we pull out a toolkit that's going to support you through that? But that support is not something you use every day. If you're using that every day, we need to be talking to the Bryces and the Felicias of the world of how do we better manage that stress. But I think there's space for it. I just think people treat it as if it's this thing they can buy off social media and not have proper prescription from someone who knows your genes, your lifestyle, and everything that's going in there. You don't want these as a crutch. You don't want them treated like candy, because they're not. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what Black Label is all about, is prescriptive, genetically informed botanical, vitamin, mineral, nutraceutical administration at the right dose.
Third-party tested quality. Know where you're getting the things you're putting in your body.
All right, fine. Because now you're getting me started. Safety,
all jacked up.
Science. The science is there. I mean, we've vetted each and every ingredient that we're using, besides third-party tested and free from. What is not in there counts as the most clean stuff you can find on the planet. And most of the stuff that's typically in your over-the-counter or at the health food store or specialized pharmacy has got a bunch of additional ingredients in it that are great for machines. Magnesium stearates and all kinds of things that help, flow agents that help process these tablets or encapsulations. We don't use any of that stuff. Hypoallergenic, free from, but even more importantly, the science, the safety is there. It's traceable to source, transparent. I mean, we're going to give you any and all the information that you need about these ingredients that we use. Efficacy, obviously, efficiency of use of these ingredients, and then purity, and then potency. That's so key. Why is everyone's still stuck on a one size fits all? So if you're going to use a botanical to lower cortisol, let's call it manage stress given your genetics, if you're going to use a botanical, why would you use the same dose if you were a 120-pound female as a 240-pound male? It makes zero sense at all. So we're really cracking the code on personalized nutraceutical delivery systems when it comes to genetic susceptibilities. That's Black Label. I love this question. It's a long one, so I'm going to summarize it. Dirk's asking about an individual such as a SEAL, a Navy SEAL. And essentially what he's talking about is their ability to handle stress inherently, innately, and wondering whether or not certain Navy SEALs who get washed out or can't make the program have select genetics that are sort of maybe not even, in their favor. The reason I bring it up and I like to address this is because that's very much it. Not everyone's meant to be a Navy SEAL. Not everyone's meant to be a CEO. Not everyone's, meant to be a teacher, for example, which could be just, easily as stressful, given the nature of the individual susceptibilities as a CEO of a large company. We just all have our unique individual genetics. When you understand them, the power is this, is that how to best implement strategies, managing techniques. I hate to use the word coping again, but so coping techniques or management techniques in order to wash over those genes or manage those genetic expressions so that you are the healthiest, most productive you that you can be. That's the power in understanding and testing. And then once you understand your DNA, because that's one and done, now we're talking about the extension of keeping your finger on the pulse through our Gut 360, our DNA aging, our various programs that help to identify where and how much you've improved over time. That's the process. Heidi's asking, how frequently would you recommend retesting the gut biome test? Once the program's implemented, how long before retesting? Great question, Dr. Kostroman. I know you have a lot of experiences with.
Yeah, Heidi, it's a little bit of a difficult question to answer, and I say that because it matters when you took your first test and what was going on in your life at that point, and then what you've done to change that, right? There's going to be certain biome pictures that we're going to want to test based on the reason you came in for it a little bit more quickly, and other ones that might take longer out, right? This is not to harp back to the DNA Precision or our other programs. This is really that element of personalization that's important, because I think the generic answer would probably be, 3 to 6 months, somewhere in that space, right? But if you're doing a lot of intensive work, maybe it needs to be sooner. If you're not doing, life isn't enabling that sort of stuff where the medical picture is more tricky and we know it's going to take longer to support, maybe that needs to be a little bit longer, right? So the generic answer is 3 to 6 months, but I would say there's a level of personalization that you can work with your practitioner to know a bit better, because I think testing is really important, but also being wise with your resources, time, energy, and effort is too. And so that's really where a clinician can come in and support and curate that and not overdo it, just like they don't underdo it. So
right.
Generic answer, 3 to 6 months, but
here's one, perhaps even for you, Felicia. Somebody, Suzanne's asking about the 360 program, wants to do it, interested in it. Where can she learn more? But her story is that she had DNA testing of some sort a couple of years ago, signed up for coaching, found it quite stressful. And at this time, she's finding that working with an exercise coach, giving her information in a scientific manner is helpful. She could probably work with you and get even, more aligned or laser-like focused if she were to do a 360 test and then ultimately shift over to your program. Tell her a little bit about what you're doing and offering.
Absolutely. Yeah. So first of all, the test, yes, I recommend it. And I say, go for it. It's a blueprint of you. And then once you get that, I will look at it on the fitness side of it, and we will see how you better work with weights or cardio. And I also will look at sleep and food. I look at it all, but it helps me understand kind of who you are. And then we'll have a call, and a 30-minute call, get to know each other type of deal. And I will dive a little bit deeper into how do you work out? Do you sleep good? How do you manage your stress? What does that look like? Do you have kids? Do you have a family? Those kind of things. If you're interested, then I write out a program, a 3-month program. I will meet with you bi-weekly, and in person. So I'm going to look at you. I'm going to be your accountability. I mean, I want you to be the best you can be.
Well,
So
and talk to us about that, because for folks that don't know you necessarily in this pool, in this audience tonight, why you? Why is it? Why does Felicia, and I know your CV and your acumen, your bio. So, spend 30 seconds or so, just your life experience and where you got yourself in training and competition. It's quite remarkable.
Oh, well, thank you. I started years ago. I was a personal trainer first and foremost because I love fitness and I love health and how the body works. And it truly can change with food and diet and no stress and all the above. But I wanted to take it to another level. And so I started competing. And over a 10-year period plus, many competitions, watching the body change, and through food and diet, the body is an amazing thing. And the way it can literally change from month to week is incredible by food and sleep and how you treat yourself. So it's all about respecting yourself. And I say that I got into it because I love what I do and how to help people achieve their best abilities. Competing was my passion. I did it till I turned pro. And once I reached that level, I was like, I want to help others. It takes competing is a whole nother level. It's a whole nother diet and food, and you miss a lot of birthdays and you miss a lot of anniversaries as far as eating and going out. But at the end, it's an amazing, empowering feeling of what your body can do. So that's why I'm always encouraging people. You can do anything you want to do, you know.
Well, especially when what's one thing that your particular if you're willing to share, that your DNA 360 has informed you about, that you wish you could go back to your training days and your competition days and tweak and modify so as to know that you probably would even have had that much better experience?
It for sure would have been that weights work better for me than cardio, but I was doing hours of cardio. I mean, to get to that level, it was like you go and you work out for an hour and then you go home and you do an hour of cardio. And that was every day. And I hated it. I hated cardio. Well, go figure, my body doesn't like it. I need some, but an hour every day. I would totally wish I could go back and be like, I probably would have turned pro a lot quicker because I would have had the blueprint to get there. Do you see what I'm saying? It took me years of guessing, and we try this and let's try that. And you're in this world of, okay, well, I gotta see what works. And you do that for 6 weeks and it's not, and then you're frustrated. And then, you get on the path of what really works. So if I'd have had the DNA test, all my laundry, I'd have been there like probably, so much sooner.
Well, hindsight's always 20/20, but it's a case in point as to how you could have probably gotten, as you're describing, not only there quicker and maybe even, elevated your high, your level of, competition to another level, but with far less stress to your body, right? I'm just sort of, speaking theoretically here, you may have put a little bit of extra, stress on your body to have taken a few months off your life when you didn't have to, had you have known.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're totally right, because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
So you're doing and you're wearing down your body and you're tearing it down. And yeah, there were days that I was like, I got to stop. I can't do anything. And it may be 2 days. I got to let my body recover, not knowing why, not knowing the right supplement I was taking or taking the wrong supplement,
Right.
having too much. So it was a totally game changer.
I want to make sure we highlight, though, something that you said, and I think this is really important to hear, especially in that kind of retrospective, oh, I wish I had known, right? The resilience of the body and the capacity of the body to heal. for those that are attending our webinar tonight, you know, I would venture stress is an element of your life, based on the statistics of the poll we took, but separately, you probably attracted this for a reason. I find people sometimes in chronic stress think that the current way my body is, it will never recover. I'll never feel good within my body again, or my health isn't going to shift, right? That tends to be some of that negative thinking that can be birthed from chronic stress. But to Felicia's point, there's such resiliency in the body. It just takes intelligent shifts that are informed by DNA, that are informed by whatever's going on in your world right now, and that are informed by that medical history.
Absolutely.
Right? So
Never too late to put
so
years.
important.
Never too late to put years on your life. Years on your life. Healthy years, health span on your life. If we can we pull up the poll results of how folks are feeling stress tonight? I'd love to see that. Oh, it's pretty equally divided.
There's a favoring of gut there.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Not only do we have this aptitude for stress, this boiling point, this average hormetic sort of Goldilocks zone, some are 80, some are 100, some are 120, some are in and around that area, but we all feel it subjectively in different organ systems. Some of us more in our heart. And again, the heart has communication with the brain pathways that are richer and, more, greater in communication than from the brain back to the heart. That's a whole other topic. The gut, some people feel the butterfly, the intuition. It's interesting. Stress is one of those things that alters perception of time. This is sort of that gut feeling. When you're stressed, people perceive time as moving slower. And it's thought this has probably got to do with some kind of a survival mechanism, allowing more time to sort of react in that moment of subjective. But anyways, a lot of folks that have that feel it in their gut, some in the brain, that's the mental emotional side, and then some in the muscles or musculoskeletal. So it's interesting how this is divided. This is a phenotypic or an expressed way in which your genes are actually dictating. So those individuals that feel it in their heart, boy, do they ought to be careful with their cardiovascular profile. Correlation is very strong. Propensity to endothelial lining, or the inside lumen of your artery linings, to stress, and the stress causing inflammation and injury, leading to cardiovascular disease and heart attacks. You got to be careful. The gut, that's the microbiome. You fix the gut, you're going to see less of that impending doom or butterfly, gut response. When it's the brain, it's really the executive function. How do we manage sleep-wake cycles, the clock gene, the COMT, DRD2, ADRA2B, and all these other genes responsible for mood, behavior, sleep-wake cycles. And then the musculoskeletal system, I would argue heavily those individuals that feel it stress, like forward head carriage, tightened muscles, back pain. Number one reason we go and see our family doctor. When you feel it in the musculoskeletal system, you are probably, as Felicia will probably endorse, you are probably not exercising the right way. Meaning you could probably manage your stress a lot better if you figured out what kind of ratio you're doing, and stretching, managing the
stretching for
hydrating.
sure.
Right, all these things, right? So important to it's not just hitting the gym for 20 or 30 minutes and then getting out. What kind of activity you're going to do to better manage the stress, and your body's going to say thank you for it, versus tightening up. A lot of people get into a bit of that trap. Do we have time for another question? I think we do. So, Richard's asking.
Good offer, yeah.
Richard's asking, he had a doctor tell me that chronic high cortisol can negatively impact thyroid and bone density. For sure, that's a smart doctor. But then they didn't offer more information. I guess the question is, does that actually happen? Well, of course it happens. Dr. Kostroman, this is all you. I mean, give us the quick and dirty on that pathway.
Yeah. Oh Lord, look at you relying on my biochemistry. So what happens is when there's this flushing of cortisol, right? Body is automatically shifted into a different state, right? To go very roughly over this, you have two different states. One is fight or flight or freeze, right? So you're going to respond to that threat, which is cortisol is signaling. Separate to that, you have more of a rest and recover, right? A lot of the functions that look at that growth, that rest, that recovery, the thyroid, the bone building, all of that happens in that rest and recovery. So if you're constantly sitting either in that fight or flight, or very quickly bouncing back and forth so that you're never really truly in this rest, right? Those systems are going to be shut down or just not working optimally. I don't want to pretend as if they don't work. They're not working optimally. And especially over time, the more you wear and wear away at that, right? Think of maintenance on anything, right? You know, if with your car, right? Your car, every once in a while, you need to go do cleanup. And so the longer you're in those stress states, the longer you're not doing some of that cleanup, there's more wear and tear ultimately that are going to wear away your bones because you're not properly replenishing them. They're a dynamic organ. They're an organ to an extent, right? They're always moving. They're not the same. You don't grow them and leave them alone. They're constantly being rebuilt. So the more that you're stressed, the more that there's cortisol there, the less you're supporting those bones. And just like with thyroid, right? Thyroid's an organism that is probably one of the most responsive and sensitive to stress because it's one of our bigger compensatory organs. Meaning when you're stressed, it's one of the first guys that goes out there and says, cool, I'm going to do all these different things. I'm going to shift metabolism. I'm going to change a bunch of different stuff so that I can respond to this stress. And if you're not resting that every once in a while, it's going to effectively burn out. That's why we're seeing so much when it comes to thyroid problems, because we're feeding so much stress to this organ that's always trying to support and compensate, that we're burning it out effectively. Right?
And the adrenals. I mean, you know, probably a little bit of an exhausted topic, but thyroid, adrenals, hypothalamus, that whole pathway.
Yeah.
It's a negative feedback loop, isn't it? I mean, you know, kind of like the thermometer or thermostat rather in your home that controls either the heat or the AC, depending on the time of year. But you set the temperature, sends a signal to either the furnace or your AC, turn on. It turns on, it pumps either heat or cool out, and then it feeds back negatively. It doesn't mean bad. It just feeds back to the thermostat to say either
I've
we've hit
gotten to
our
this point.
right. But if it's, you know, hot, summer's hot and it's 30 degrees out and you put it on, you know, you want your environment to be 20, you know, degrees in the home or 18, that, you know, is constantly working. You know, it can almost never reach, I don't care how good your system is. And it's a lot of strain and wear on the AC unit, and eventually, to your point, it'll burn out. So that's high stress. And I got to take this next question because we didn't talk about it, and it's got such, you know, huge relation to management of stress, especially for those who are predisposed to poor sleep. The question is, you know, what is the relationship between sleep habits and stress levels, and how do genes that are involved process working together against each other? Really important. I'm going to be quick about it because I know we're kind of running out of time. Sleep has an architecture to it. Right? Most people have this misconception that dreams or dream states the deepest. It's not. We go through 4 stages of sleep and bounce up into REM, rapid eye movement, which is behind our eyelids. Our eyes are going nuts when we're dreaming. But stage 1, 2, 3, 4 is necessary to accomplish before REM. These stages each have different brain waves to them. So to take a quick tangent over, brain waves are really important to acknowledge here as well. You can test for these things, but beta, essentially, especially high beta, is active thinking. We're doing it right now when we're talking about the topic at hand on the webinar, problem solving, focus. But it can also induce high anxiety and stress. Too long beta, not good. Low to mid beta, that's more of a state of alertness, active engagement. Then there's alpha. That's the meditative state. But that, I just want to point out here, optimal sort of zone for most people is 50 minutes in beta and then 5 or 10 minutes in alpha. That's the theanine that we use in Black Label. Sun theanine particularly can induce those alpha waves specifically prior to meditation, and it's going to enhance that, you know, that response. So this is linked to alertness, concentration, but calm without sedation. And then there's theta, and without getting into the weeds, it's associated with ultra relaxation, some creativity, and so forth. And delta, that's when you're sleeping. Delta, you're like passed out. Gamma is associated with more sort of high level information processing and so forth. So brain waves aside, when you're sleeping, it's really delta, especially stage 3 and 4. And our brains don't have lymphatic systems. They don't work the way the rest of our body neck down works. They rely on non-thinking cells called glial cells, which account for what's called a glymphatic system to detoxify our brains at night. This is one of the most important things, and we test for this. We test your detox capability. We test your ability clock, TPH2, serotonin, 5-HTLPR, these different genes that help you get into sleep, stay asleep. So the point is, stage 3 and 4 and maintenance of that deep, restful stage sleep is how you're going to perform more optimally the following day, but also how well you throw out the garbage. And guess what? We talk about sleep hygiene, cool. So, 65 to 68 is the zone. Cool temperature in your room allows for that lymphatic drainage. So we look at all of it, and the correlation is huge between genetic susceptibilities to these things and sleep. Now, if you do the quick and dirty back of the napkin math, what we're looking at is achieving 4 to 5 of these cycles for 1, 2, 3, 4, bounce up into REM every night, because the average person takes about 90 minutes to achieve that. So what does that mean? 4 to 5, that's where you get the 7 to 8 hours a night. But full circle to the question, you can't always achieve those deep. It's not all about how many hours you clock on the pillow. It's how effectively you get into stage 3 and 4, your lymphatic detox system, reset that button, metabolic waste out, new day ahead, right? So when you're more predisposed to stress, given your genetic susceptibilities, the more quickly you're going to accumulate metabolic toxins in the brain. The more you better damn well make sure your sleep is optimal, that sleep hygiene's optimal, detox is better achieved at night, so that you're actually ready to push that big red reset button for the next day.
Yeah. No, I love that.
That was
answer.
good. That was good
That was
stuff.
a very
was
long
really
answer,
good.
but it was a very succinct answer. It was very helpful because I think there's a
Oh,
lot.
I made
There's
it right at the
so much to
7:30
get around.
buzzer.
Oh, look at that. All right. So is this then, I think, where we start to offer our gratitude to our wonderful little audience for showing up. So thank you. Thank you for spending your time with us this evening. Thank you for being curious about your health and how you can better navigate the stresses of the world. We collectively, the three of us sit here, but separately the DNA company as a whole, we sincerely do care about supporting you in this health journey in a very customized, personalized way. Because as we've talked about tonight, no two people are going to have the same stress plan, the same health plan, the same exercise plan. So thank you for spending your time with us and getting curious. Bryce, Felicia, as always, y'all make me happy. Thank you for coming and
so
sharing your
much.
wisdom. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks
So much
everyone here
fun.
as well.
Thank you all very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.